Welcome to the debate. Today, we are diving deep into a pretty comprehensive health check on Yearn Finance. It's obviously a leading, maybe even foundational yield aggregator protocol. We're examining its longevity, its actual resilience against market volatility, and crucially, its competitive standing within this constantly shifting DeFi ecosystem.
Right. And the central question we really have to tackle today is, well, it's quite stark. Does Yearn Finance's core commitment to security and, let's say, reliable yield justify its current, frankly, lackluster economic performance and its rather complex, semi-decentralized governance structure? Or are these very factors fundamentally undermining its long-term competitiveness and resilience, especially against newer, maybe hungrier protocols?
I'm going to maintain that Yearn's security-first mission, which is backed by robust architecture like its V3 vaults, coupled with its adaptive governance structure and these focused incentive reforms we're seeing, actually positions it for sustainable, deep resilience. I think it's moved beyond just being an aggregator. It's becoming a crucial DeFi primitive.
And I'll be arguing that Yearn's competitive viability is, well, actively deteriorating. The protocol's visibly low actual yields, especially when you look at the stablecoin vault, combined with the inherent risks of, frankly, centralized execution within its governance model, these pose serious threats to user confidence and its whole trustless mandate.
Okay, let's unpack my position first. Yearn Finance's philosophy, it's always been pretty simple but powerful. Provide good returns reliably. It's about prioritizing capital protection over chasing, fleeting speculative high yields. This cautious strategy isn't just a mission statement. It's, I think, a model of resilience. And when we look at the technical groundwork, the new V3 vaults, they're built on the ERC 4626 standard, which is basically a standardized tokenized vault interface. And that ensures high composability and trust. Furthermore, the protocol is showing serious adaptability with this proposal to allocate a huge chunk, 90%, of future revenue directly to STYFI holders. Now, this is a critical structural shift. It's designed to align long-term accountability with financial incentives, really stabilizing the protocol's economic foundation.
Okay. I see why you emphasize that stability, but let me reframe the discussion around the economic reality, which I think is currently Yearn's biggest vulnerability. The data, well, it suggests the protocol is struggling, and struggling fiercely with competitive pressures. Just consider the stablecoin vaults. Users often see these advertised annual percentage yields, the APYs, maybe 20% to 22%, but the actual realized returns, they consistently settle much closer to maybe 5% to 7% over the long haul. This huge gap between what's promised and what people actually get, well, that really frustrates users. It leads to pretty explicit complaints about false or deceptive rates, and crucially, it leads to capital flight. Users are moving funds to platforms explicitly advertised to yield much more.
But that discrepancy needs context, surely. Those high advertised rates you mentioned, they're often ephemeral. They might be based on temporary, high-risk strategies or, heavily inflated by short-term token emissions. The very kind of thing Yearn is trying to avoid.
Maybe, but that avoidance comes at a staggering cost. The financial health indicators are concerning. The protocol's reported monthly revenue, recently it's been hovering under the $200,000 mark. So if the primary stablecoin vaults, which are your foundational product, are actually driving users away because they underperform, how can the protocol sustain the high operational cost of, say, consistent security audits and the extensive developer network needed for complex strategy management? So let's really start the core debate with this foundational challenge of yield. How long can Yearn actually sustain its longevity when its core product is perceived as, well, drastically underperforming its key rivals? The argument of reliability over risk is increasingly becoming, I think, indistinguishable from just uncompetitive yields in the eyes of the average retail user. They are pulling funds, explicitly looking for higher ROI, and we aren't just talking about chasing some crazy 100% APR here. We're talking about competitors like, say, Beefy Finance, which consistently offers respectable, transparent yield, and importantly, has a broader, more flexible chain integration footprint. that directly challenges Yearn's market standing.
Right, but we have to acknowledge the inherent fragility that's often built into many of these high-yield competitors. Yearn isn't selling the highest return, it is selling a security premium. We shouldn't confuse market sentiment during maybe a dormant period with structural failure. Yearn is quite explicit about aiming for good yields in a trustless and secure manner. When you analyze broader DeFi, you see that protocols prioritizing robust security and optimization are generally the ones that endure market cycles. You brought up the $200,000 monthly revenue. I'd frame that differently. That figure could be evidence of a lean, sustainable operation that isn't reliant on constantly minting and distributing inflationary native tokens just to prop up APYs. The protocol's history includes rigorous public security disclosures, audits. These aren't just designed to catch obvious bugs, but also to mitigate subtle logic errors and economic design risks that cause systemic failures elsewhere. Stability during volatility is paramount, and I believe that stability justifies the premium.
But how much is the market really willing to pay for that security premium when the effective return is, say, halved? If you only make 5% in a vault, you're paying a huge opportunity cost. And if Yearn is struggling to generate significant revenue during a market lull, how quickly will it be able to ramp up its competitive strategy development when the next bull cycle actually hits? Low revenue means limited resources for attracting top strategy developers, and that could potentially lead to stagnation, couldn't it?
Well, strategy development is intrinsically linked to the governance and execution model, which brings us to the next critical point. Our governance structure, I think, effectively balances community democratic input with the necessary speed of expert execution. Yes, YFI holders control the high-level policy, the treasury, tokenomics, fundamental protocol changes, but the actual deployment relies on a multi-signature group, a multi-sig, alongside the core development teams, the Y teams, as they're called. This centralization of execution, I argue, is a feature, not a bug. It's vital for rapid response, like migrating assets immediately during an exploit or implementing urgent bug fixes without waiting for, a lengthy 7-day on-chain voting period, which could literally lead to millions in losses.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's purely a feature. I'm not convinced by that reasoning, because the concentration of power in execution fundamentally compromises the trustless ideal. The multi-sig essentially holds the admin keys to the kingdom. The DAO teams develop and propose solutions, handle crucial off-chain stuff like the front end and docs, and then the multi-sig deploys the final code. This means token holders are often, reduced to merely rubber-stamping decisions that have already been vetted and prepared centrally. The community votes on an outcome that's effectively been decided by the experts who hold all the key information, creating significant information asymmetry.
But that framing neglects the reality of complex systems, doesn't it? The governance tokens do grant holders the power to veto catastrophic changes and control the treasury. The sheer complexity inherent in managing millions across different chains and strategies requires specialization. It isn't really about limiting democracy. It's about acknowledging that maybe only a handful of people globally truly grasp the full economic and technical implications of certain code changes. Furthermore, the protocol's new mechanism, funneling 90% of revenue to locked stay Wi-Fi holders, profoundly enhances accountability. The people holding those execution keys are now directly financially incentivized by the long-term success of the protocol. That ensures their interests aligned with security and resilience.
Accountability is good, I grant you that. But the system still explicitly discourages the broad participation that really defines true decentralization. The fact that it's stated they discourage participation from those lacking information or knowledge acts as a deliberate barrier. And while, yes, rapid response is necessary, that risk tied to the centralization of execution remains, for me, the single greatest deviation from the core mandate of a truly decentralized financial protocol. That small group could be compromised or they could collude. It represents a central point of failure that no amount of technical security auditing can ever fully eliminate. Okay, finally, let's analyze Yearn's strategic position within the wider DeFi landscape. Yearn is fundamentally classified as a yield farming aggregator, right? That means it's essentially a second-layer protocol built on top of other DeFi primitives, lending protocols like Aave, DEX liquidity pools, and so on. Now, while composability is generally seen as DeFi's superpower, being layered like this exposes Yearn to magnified systemic risks, both economic and technical, from all the underlying protocols it relies on. If Aave suffers some economic design flaw or a particular DEX strategy suddenly becomes unprofitable, Yearn's vaults suffer almost immediately. This sort of parasitic dependency limits its independent resilience, doesn't it?
That's a compelling point regarding systemic risk, but again, I'd frame it quite differently. I see Yearn's adoption as a trusted, foundational layer by sophisticated newer protocols as the thing that truly guarantees its longevity. It's actually moving beyond simple aggregation and becoming something of a standard. Look specifically at Morpho Vaults v2. Morpho is this complex system designed as a kind of universal gateway to on-chain yield, and it operates through these flexible adapter contracts. The crucial point here, I think, is that one of its initial core adapters is the Morpho Vault v1 adapter.
Okay, so what does that specific adapter really signify?
It signifies trust. Deep trust. Morpho is deliberately choosing to leverage Yearn's v1 vaults, the ones that are highly vetted, battle-tested, the established standard, as a stable input for its own advanced yield orchestration. This means Yearn is being explicitly built upon, integrated as a reliable primitive in the asset management category. It's similar to how, everyone relies on Uniswap for swaps or Aave for basic lending. Its v3 architecture, using that ERC 4626 standard we mentioned, makes this integration seamless and trustworthy. So, Yearn is less a parasite absorbing risk and more like an established, mature organ within the DeFi body that sophisticated systems are now relying on. This kind of structural reliance, I believe, ensures its long-term relevance, even if its direct user interface faces stiff competition from meta aggregators. So, in conclusion, Yearn Finance is, I think, demonstrating a clear transition into a more mature phase of development. It's shifting focus away from maybe unsustainable, hyper-competitive yields towards maximizing structural robustness. The deep commitment to security, the adoption of v3 standards for better composability, and the proactive evolution of its economic governance, particularly that commitment to reward locked YFI holders with 90% of revenue. These are powerful markers. Yearn's reputation for security and its proven capacity for integration are its greatest resilience factors, ensuring its role, I believe, as a core component of the yield stack going forward.
Well, the analysis must always circle back to the market reality. Reliability and security alone are simply not enough if the actual returns are severely underperforming competitors. That results in low revenue and, frankly, constrained growth prospects. And the tension between the ideal of fully decentralized governance and the necessary centralization required for efficient expert execution, the multi-sigs, the yield teams, that remains a really significant unaddressed technical and social risk factor. Yearn has to bridge this gap between its technical prowess and its economic performance to ensure its long-term viability.
Ultimately, the true health check of Yearn Finance really hinges on whether the broader DeFi market values structural robustness, consistent security, and reliable composability, as we see demonstrated by its use in platforms like Morpho, over the maybe more tempting short-term pursuit of higher, albeit riskier yields. The success or failure of its forthcoming governance and economic reforms will absolutely be the single most crucial metric determining its long-term viability.